Hello and welcome to week 7. This week we're going to look at forms and how we validate form using JavaScript. My name is Mildred. Now in HTML we create a form using the form tag, and we have looked previously at the different attributes that we have. One of such attributes is the ID attribute that we use to refer to each element when we want to get the value of that element or when we want to make reference to that element in JavaScript. Another attribute is the name attribute. Let's give this form the name user. Now we have a form tag, has an ID attribute, has a name attribute. We have an input field for full name and an input field for email and a submit button. We want to see how we can get this form value using JavaScript. So on the web page we want to enter a value here and we want to do something with that value when we click on the submit button. We can access the form field using the document object model, and let's say we want to fill in this name and then we want to get the data that is filled in and maybe display it in the console. So let me open the console here. So we have the console opened and we're going to try that. We can use the get element by ID, or we can use the form name to refer to the form. Let's do it the first way. On our JavaScript file, let's create a variable called form and we want to get the form. Now if we get by ID, we have the value for the ID attribute in the form tag is user form. So we can say document dot get element by ID and then the form name is user, let's see, user form. So now we have gotten the form and we store that form in this variable. We can get the name field from the form, or we can just refer to it by the ID attribute. So the name field is called name. So we'll say constant name field is equal to document dot get element by ID name. We want to see when the submit button is clicked, that different events that can be triggered when we use forms. We can have the submit events, that's the on submit, change events when an input loses focus, so it's on change, on focus when an input gains focus, on blur when an input field loses focus, and then we have on input when the value changes while typing. There are different events. You can refer to your lesson resource to see the events and their definition. But we want to add an event listener to the form. So let's say form.add event listener, and we want to add a submit event here. And when the submit button is clicked, we want to run a function. So we'll say event, and when the submit button is clicked, there is a default action of the form, and we always want to prevent default first. So we'll say event.prevent default, and then we're going to now log in the console. So console.log, let's log the value of the username. So let's say username, let's add the value here. So we'll say name field.value. So when we come to our web page and we refresh, when we type the name here and we submit, it gives us the value of the name. So this is one way that we get out the values from form field. But we can get it another way, and another way is to say we want to use the form.form name.input field name or things like that. So let's say we want to get it like they say document.form.form name. So we look at the value of the name attribute, which is user form. So documents.form.form name is going to be the form. But for the input field, so we have documents.form.form name.input field name.value. So now we already have documents.form.form name stored in the variable form. So we can say form.input field name, and the input field here for the username is name. So we'll say .name.value. So we've gotten the value of the input field, and so here we can just come here to say or we can put this here and say once we on submit, we want to get the value of the input field, and then we want to print that out because we have the value here. All right. Or you can also print out using the backticks like this and a pair of curly braces. Okay. So when we refresh our web page, we have properties of undefined user form, and let's come back here to see. So we have documents.forms.form name. All right. So when I come here and I refresh and I type this and I click submit, I have the name. All right. So we know the different events that we can have. Let's look at another example on our HTML file. I'm going to comment this out. I want to look at this input field, for instance. Let's say we want to create a function called focus function, and when this input field gains focus, we want to do something, and when this focus is removed. So on blur and on focus, these are two events, and when you put them as an attribute in an HTML element, you use on before it. But if you are adding an event listener, you don't put the on part, you just put focus and blur. So on focus, we want to run a function. On blur, we want to run a function. Let's create a function called function focus and blur function here. So here I want to create a function. We create a function with the function keyword, and the name for the function is focus function. And what we want to do here is to change the background color of that input field when it gains focus. So now we can see here that when it gains focus, the background color is blue. So we want to change that. So we're going to come here and we're going to say document.get element by ID, and the ID here is username. Okay, so get element by ID username. Now when we want to change the CSS property like the background color, put .style. Now the name of the property is background color. So background color is equal to this camel case. So let's put a color here. I'll say #E0F7. all right, and then we have another function which is the blur function. So we'll create another function blur function, and here what we want to do is to change the background color to white when it loses focus. So we'll say document.get element by ID, and the ID is still username .style.background color equal to, let's just use white. So these are the functions we want to run when this input field receives focus and when it loses focus. So when we refresh here, when it receives focus, this function focus is not defined. Let's see, focus function is not defined. Let's look at here, focus function camel case like this. All right, so when we refresh now, all is well. When it gains focus, the background color inside here change and it turns to white. So you can see when we start typing is blue background color within the box. You can change that color to say, let's say we want it red, and when we refresh, when we start, the background color is red there. So you can use this to change validation message, like if the input entered inside meets the requirements. Maybe you want to make the border green so that the user will know that, or put a green check mark beside it or something like that. And that's how we do validations for JavaScript. Now we do validation of our forms to ensure that user provide valid and complete information before we submit. And HTML5 has some attributes that are built in for validation. Like when you have an HTML element like this, you can put the required attribute like this, and it makes this field required without adding JavaScript validation. You can also put the pattern attribute and put a pattern of the inputs that should be entered. You can put a min length and max length, things like this, and put the minimum number of characters that should be entered in the field. These are inbuilt HTML validation. But what we have been doing is a custom JavaScript validation. The inbuilt HTML validation will not just cut it in production, and so you want to have the other layer JavaScript before you have a server-side validation also. So you always want to have a validation on the client side so that it's faster and the user interacts with the user's browser in real time before even making that trip to the server to see if the inputs are correct. So let's look at other custom validations that we can use in JavaScript. So we have looked at several custom validations that we can have, how we can change CSS here using that, how we can add an event listener, how we can validate that and make sure that the input is not blank. We can do something like you want to look at the input field and make sure that the user enters something. You can come in here and get the ID and make sure that the value is not empty, and if it's empty, you want to display a message to the user. You can refer to your lesson resource for a full validation example for different types where you check if a password is entered, if the password and the confirmed password match, and things like that. All right, you can also have like real-time validation, like once you are typing, you want the validation to happen as you type. Let's use another example here. I'm going to comment this out and I'm going to use this. All right, so I'm refreshing my page and you see what we have there. So I want to type here, and while I type, you want to see the validation message telling us something about the input that we are putting in. So on my JavaScript file, I want to create a function and I want to add an event listener for that input field, and I want to use the input or on input event to run a function once a user starts typing in an input field. So we want to work with this input field with the ID username, and so get this, I'll say constant, or let's just get it document.get element by ID, and we want to get an element whose ID is username. So we'll add an event listener here, add event listener. We're adding adding the input event listener input, and once this input is being entered, we want to run a function, put function, and we want to get the value. So let's say constant val is equal to this dot val. So this refers to within the scope of this function the object itself, right? So let's say this dot value, and we can get, so there are different ways you can write this. You can do it the other way, but I'm trying to show you different ways, and so when you see codes you'll be able to read them. So say constant, let's say message is equal to, now we have this paragraph tag that we want to use to display the message, and so the value of the ID attribute here is user hint. So say constant message is equal to document dot get element by ID user hint, and we want to be able to print something to the inner HTML of this when we are typing. So now let's say one of the validation we want to do is we want the length to be greater than 4, the length of the input typed in. So let's say if val dot length is less than 4, we want to print out a message and we want to change the color. So let's say message, so we store this in message, so we say message dot text content is equal to username must be at least characters, and then we change the color of the text. So message dot style dot color, let's make the text color, but if it is not less than 4, we want to maybe say looks good and change the color to green. So we'll say message dot text content is equal to look good, and then we have color of the text should now be green. All right, so when we come to our web page and we refresh and we start typing, because it's on input, it will continue to put this message until it is 4 or greater than 4, then looks. So you can do the real life one like this. When the user starts typing, you start validating until everything is okay. So you can refer to your lesson resource and look at more examples like this. It is quite straightforward once you get how to refer to the form, how to get the field within that form, how to get the values from the field, then you know exactly how to work with your DOM. We did that in week 6, where you look at the different ways we can access the DOM, and you can call any HTML element using the DOM, and you can manipulate these elements and manipulate CSS also. All right, so look through your lesson resource, you'll find a lab and you find examples of a complete form validation. You can have a button and you can disable that button until it passes validation. For instance, I'll delete all of this and let's comment this out and let's use this. All right, so we use this contact form and we want to leave this button disabled. So as you can see here, we made the button disabled by default, and we want the button to be enabled once it passes all the validation. So we want to have certain validation that we want to check. Maybe we want to check the value of the email or the length of the message, if the length of the message is greater than 5 or something like that. So let's think of what to do here. We are going to enable that button once it passes all validation tests. So now when we start typing in here, we don't have a button to click on. It's not enabled. We want to use JavaScript to enable that button. So let's get all of the values. We have the value of the ID attribute here is email, for the text area here is message, and for the button it is submit button. So let's get them here. So let's say constant email is equal to document.get element by ID email. Constant message is equal to document.get element by ID message, and we have the constant button is equal to document.get element by ID submit button. Now we have all of these HTML elements stored in variables here. Now let's create a function, and this function, let's call it check validity. Now we want to get the button, so we'll say it's stored in btn, so we'll say btn.disabled is equal, so we'll say not, we'll put a not there. So if there's no value in the email and the length of the value of the message is greater than 5 or something like that, so it's not greater than 5 because we use the not outside here. So message.value.length is greater than 5, so we use not here. So what we want is the email will have a value and the length of the message is greater than 5. That's what we want, but we want it to be disabled if this is not the case. And if it's the case, so we want to add event listener on inputs to check validity for the email and for the message, and once this is satisfied, it's no longer going to be disabled. So let's say email.add event listener, and we're adding this event listener on inputs. So there's another way you can do this. I'm trying to break it down into smaller pieces so you can understand. We run the function check validity. We also do that for the message.add event listener input, and we want to just run the function check validity. So once we start typing into the email, it runs this function. When we start typing into the message, it runs this function. And the button is not going to be disabled anymore once this condition is no longer true. So let us refresh our page and let's start typing the email and let's start typing the message. Once it's now greater than 5, you'll see that it's enabled. But once it's less than 5 or 5, it's going to be disabled until I start another word. And now we have our button. And once it's clear, then the button is back disabled. So you can do this disable of button until all validation passes. You can also display validation with CSS feedback. Let's say, for instance, let's use this one. Now we have this input for email here. We can use CSS to do. I'll save this and then I'll refresh here, and we can use the CSS for validation here. So let me delete all of this, refresh my page, and let's say we have a style in the head area here. Now for CSS, we looked at pseudo class and pseudo element in our CSS course, and we can use pseudo class to validate this. So I'll close style here in the head area. Now we want to say for the input, we have the valid pseudo class, and we can say when it's valid, we want to change the border to be 2px solid and green, and we want to use the invalid input invalid, and when it is invalid, we want to change this to red. So we say border 2px, let's say dash red, something like this. Okay, and when we come in here to the, let me delete this form here. So when we come here, we can see that this has a placeholder enter valid email, and it now has a required attribute here for the HTML. And so because this is required, it's going to use this valid and invalid. So when we refresh our page, this is going to be red because it is empty. When we start typing in, let's say, then it becomes green because now it is valid. Okay, so these are the different ways we can work with forms and JavaScript. In the advanced course, we are going to look at more complex examples. We'll refer to your lesson resource to look deeply at the different form validation, and in our live class, you can ask further questions about form validation and also look at more complex examples on how we can convert from one unit of measurement to another using JavaScript when we have forms in HTML that collect different units. This is where we end this lesson. Thank you and hope to see you in the advanced course.